Natasha Kampusch was only 10 years old when she was abducted and held captive for over 8 years. At the age of 18, she bravely made her escape, but didn't really receive the welcome home she'd always dreamed of. And it's stories like hers and so many others that you can only find on Viaplay. Viaplay is a streaming service that offers dark and complex true crime shows and thrillers that you really can't see anywhere else. They showcase brutal crimes that often happen in safe neighborhoods, and you've probably never even heard of them. You can try it free for 7 days. I have it linked in my bio. It's pretty much Netflix's biggest European competitor right now, so I promise you won't regret it.
I'm guessing you've all seen the videos about how our timelines are messed up. Like how it doesn't make sense in my brain that Oxford University is older than the Aztec Empire. But there's so many more of these weird history overlaps that I want to share with you today. And you already know that if you love the dark and spooky, you'll love the podcast. This one really got me, but Ruby Bridges, the first Black child to attend an all-white school, is still alive, and she's not even 70 years old yet. John Tyler, the 10th president of the United States, had a grandson that died in 2020. Charlie Chaplin and Ludacris, alive at the same time. Harriet Tubman was born in Thomas Jefferson's lifetime and died in Ronald Reagan's lifetime. This one is absolutely the craziest to me, but Betty White was born 7 years before Anne Frank. And T-Rexes were around closer to humans than to Stegosauruses. Basically, they were around closer to iPhones than to other dinosaurs. And last but not least, Helen Keller died the year Tony Hawk was born.
Haunting photos taken seconds before the end. Part 1. The woman in this photo, Courtney Sanford, took this selfie and posted it to Facebook with the caption, "The happy song makes me so happy." A few seconds later, she collided with a recycling truck in a fiery blaze that claimed her life. This photo shows a man named John Jones who was exploring Utah County's Nutty Putty Cave. While he was exploring, he became stuck and was trapped upside down for 12 hours until he died due to cardiac arrest. This is the last picture ever taken by Filipino politician Ronaldo Dogsa, who accidentally captured the face of his assassin and moments later was shot and killed. This photo from a surveillance cam shows 2-year-old James Bulger holding the hand of a 10-year-old boy at a shopping mall in England. The 10-year-old boy, along with one of his friends, abducted, tortured, and murdered James, making them the youngest killers in British history.
This is Daniel Robitaille, better known by the moniker Candyman. He was an African-American painter who fell in love with a white girl named Caroline Sullivan in the late 1800s. Daniel wanted to give the love of his life a daughter, but upon learning of their relationship, Carol's father hired a lynch mob to hunt him down and kill him. After they found Daniel, they chopped his right hand off with a saw and covered him in raw honey from a honeycomb. This attracted a swarm of bees which stung Daniel all over his body and face. Caroline was now forced to look at Daniel's disfigured face before he succumbed to his injuries and died. Although his body had been destroyed, his soul hadn't. His new name of Candyman, given to him by one of the children involved in the lynch mob, would forever be spoken as an urban legend. It is said that if you say his name 5 times in a mirror and turn out the lights, the Candyman will pay you a visit and kill you with a rusty hook. Are you brave enough to try and summon the Candyman?
This little girl was found adrift at sea, and decades later she revealed the horrifying truth. In 1961, a man and his wife rented a ship to take them and their 3 kids from Florida to the Bahamas. The man also brought his friend and former veteran Julian Harvey as his captain, along with his new wife Mary. The trip was going smoothly at first, until a few days in, one of the children, Terry Jo, was awoken by screaming in the middle of the night. She went to the upper deck and discovered Captain Harvey had murdered his wife and stabbed her father, mother, and older brother. Harvey then slapped her across the face and told her to go below deck. While Terry Jo was on the lower deck, water began rising to her level, so she ran up to Harvey, who told her the ship was sinking. He then jumped into the water and climbed in a lifeboat with the body of Terry's dead sister Renee, who he had just drowned. Terry then took the single life raft on the ship out into the ocean with no food, water, or shelter, like for part 2.
A Pennsylvania woman faked her own kidnapping just so that she wouldn't have to tell her family that she lied about going to a college that she was supposed to graduate from. So 11 p.m. on Monday, Chloe Stein texted her boyfriend saying she was coming home from work. But then no one heard from her and she never made it home. Police were eventually called the next day after her boyfriend found her car abandoned. So a missing persons report gets filed, but then that day she shows up at a neighbor's house claiming that she had been kidnapped by an assailant. And right away, police start feeling like her story is just not adding up. Like there's a bunch of inconsistencies that just don't make sense. Earlier that day, her parents had told police that she was supposed to graduate from Penn State Greater Allegheny this month. So they called the school, but the school said that she hadn't been enrolled in a year and a half. The search and rescue for Chloe cost tens of thousands of dollars over the course of the day, and she was hanging out behind her garage the entire time. So now police think that this was all just a ruse to distract from the fact that she wasn't going to be graduating.
This pilot tried to purposely crash this plane that had 80 passengers on board. Last Sunday, an Alaska airline flight was flying from Washington to San Francisco but had to make an emergency stop when this off-duty pilot tried to crash the plane. 44-year-old pilot Joseph Emerson was off-duty, but he was still on this flight. He was given access to sit on the deck jump seat, which is a third seat that's located in the cockpit behind the pilot. Typically, off-duty pilots are authorized to sit here, but not long after the flight took off, out of nowhere, Joseph got up and tried to turn off the engines. Fortunately, the pilots noticed and were able to stop him before he could do anything. Joseph was then taken to the back of the airplane where he was handcuffed to a railing. He's now facing 83 counts of attempted murder and reckless endangerment. But Joseph pleaded not guilty, and according to court documents, he said that he took magic mushrooms 48 hours before the flight. He also said that he's been struggling with depression for 6 years and hadn't slept for 40 hours and had a nervous breakdown. But Alaska Airlines have stated that Joseph seemed perfectly fine before boarding the plane. I really hope that Joseph faces serious consequences because this is traumatizing. I probably wouldn't be able to board another plane for a very long time after this.
This is a disturbing unsolved case of a man who vanished and then was found years later dead in a freezer in London. Roy Bigg was around 70 years old when he vanished in February 2012. It wasn't until 2021, when builders were working on the former Simpsons wine bar in Forest Gate, that he was discovered. Tragically, he was found deceased in a freezer in the basement of the property, and frustratingly, we have more questions than answers in this case. Roy was identified through dental records after being found on the 15th of October 2021. Interestingly, his cause of death was inconclusive. Police stated that he was likely in the freezer for several years, and despite it being over 2 years since he was found, police are still searching for information on his killer. The Metropolitan Police stated, although our investigation and previous media appeals have provided us with information about Roy's life, we still need your help in identifying who is responsible. So much of this case still remains a complete mystery, and a £20,000 reward is currently available for information leading to the arrest, charge and prosecution of those responsible. Anybody who does think that they may have even the tiniest bit of information is encouraged to contact the Metropolitan Police.
This seemingly normal mother in Idaho was found to be one of the worst pedophiles in the state's history. So meet Courtney Sue Reschke. In 2013, she was sentenced to 20 years in prison. So Courtney had a son that was in high school. But it sounds like at one point when her son's friends were over hanging out, Courtney decided that she was attracted to them. Yes, Courtney was attracted to her own son's friends. She then hopped onto Facebook and used Facebook Messenger and text messages to begin contacting the friends of her son. She then began luring these minors to her house one by one, plying them with alcohol and assaulting them. These events that she held at her home with her son's underage friends became known as sex parties. So eventually the children's parents began to find out about all of this and they went to the police. That's when they discovered the Facebook chats, the text messages, and all the other evidence. Now, Courtney was eventually sentenced to 20 years in prison. And all 6 of these lewd conduct charges stemmed from her assault of a 15-year-old boy on multiple occasions. And though it was never conclusively proven that Courtney had given these children alcohol and actually had these sex parties with multiple minors, she had entered an Alford plea on these charges, which means that she didn't admit guilt, but she did admit that there was evidence which could have shown that she committed these crimes. But yeah, because of these horrific things that she did to these minors, Courtney still got about 10 years of prison time.
This girl's ex-boyfriend killed her right after this photo was taken. This is a picture of Jolie Callan, who is 18. And after this photo was taken, her ex-boyfriend, Lauren Bunner, shot her twice and then pushed her body off the cliff. The couple decided to remain friends after they broke up, and Bunner had suggested they go hiking. on August 30th, 2015. And chillingly enough, Jolie texted one of her friends the night before saying, "If something happens to me, you know who I was with." Bunner then took this photo of Jolie looking over the cliff, and moments later he would shoot her, once in the back of the head and then once between the eyes. He would then throw her body more than 40 feet off the cliff. Her ex-boyfriend even uploaded 4 pictures of Jolie to Instagram that day, with this picture specifically being posted last saying, "Oh, you know, just enjoying the view, at Jolie." Lauren Bunner told investigators that him and Jolie were actually part of a suicide pact, and that he was supposed to shoot her and then kill himself, but he could not go through with it. He finally pleaded guilty in July, nearly 2 years after her murder. He was tried as an adult and was sentenced to 52 years in prison. But what makes this more disturbing is that Jolie went on this hike with her ex-boyfriend with an open heart and not worrying about her life being in danger at all. And the second she turns her back, her ex-boyfriend shoots her twice. It's just super unsettling seeing someone's last moments on picture, because we know what's coming, but they have no idea. May Jolie rest in peace, and this case is absolutely sickening.
One thing we like to do in the Army is just share stories with each other. And something I always brought up was scary stories and ghost stories as a topic of conversation, because I had a few encounters with some scary stuff, as our host would say. There was this pretty salty guy in Ranger Battalion. I think I had been there for about 2 months, and he was the squad leader. And he overheard some of the newer guys telling our ghost stories. He said, "I got a story for you guys." And he came over and he told us about how back when he was in sniper section, he was running security for this platoon in Afghanistan. And just give you guys a little bit of background about how, you know, things are done, just so you know where he was. Generally, you have like your assault element, which will be the guys like going into the building. And then you'll have some type of eyes in the sky, which they didn't have on this mission, would be like ISR, be like planes rotating around. And then you have your isolation and containment teams. So they're going to be off, you know, a couple 100 meters, pretty much keeping guys from coming in. So anyway, he was getting set up for security and nothing was really happening on his side. And the assault element said someone that's running away from the target buildings, moving in this direction towards these series buildings. And that was the area that he was covering. And he said when he saw this man, he was unarmed. He was wearing one of those long, in Afghanistan they call them a shalwar kameez. He said that when this guy was running to the other building, he sort of like drooped down into the ground and then split in half and turned into 2 dogs or coyotes, and they ran in opposite directions, and his clothes just stayed on the ground.
This is the spoon video, one of the hardest videos to watch explained. The video I'm about to explain is a pretty quick one, and it's about 27 seconds long. But just because it's short doesn't mean it's not disturbing. The video opens up with 2 guys sitting on the floor. The one has a white shirt and the other has a blue shirt. The victims have their hands tied behind their back, and one of the men then come up to the victim in the white shirt and begins to cut off every one of his fingers one by one with hedge clippers. The victim is taking it extremely well also, not screaming or making any noise whatsoever. You then begin to see a big puddle of blood behind the victim's back where his hands are. But the victim in the blue shirt is getting it far, far worse. And this is where it gets disturbing. At the start, you see the victim in the blue being held by one of the men by his hair, and you can see something has obviously been done to his eyes. Where his eyes are, it's completely covered in blood, and it actually looks like he's crying blood instead of tears, which makes this video even more unsettling. In the beginning of the video, you see the man drop a knife, so they might have stabbed the victim in the eyes first, and as the video goes on, you see the man get a spoon, and he then digs it into the victim's eye socket, trying to remove his eye. He starts with the victim's right eye, and he then digs the spoon in and pulls it out. You can see the eye of the victim wanting to pop out, but I don't know if it does come out because the quality is pretty bad. But one thing is for sure, this victim is never going to see again. After the man keeps digging the spoon into the victim's eyes, the video then concludes. But the worst part about this whole video is that they let these victims live. And who knows what else they did to these guys. Some sources even say that the cartel made them fight after the video. This is absolutely brutal, and can you imagine getting tortured and having your eyes ripped out, and that being the last thing you ever see in your life? He probably replays this whole situation in his head on repeat, and his PTSD has to be insane. Never go searching for this video because it's definitely one of the hardest watches, and luckily it's extremely hard to find.
This mother disappeared, it made no sense. When the truth came out, it was more horrific than anyone could have ever imagined. Christine Sheddy was 26 when she vanished. It was the 12th of November 2007, and Christine was a single mother. She loved her kids, enjoyed hanging out with her friends, and helping with the family business. When she went missing, she was living in Maryland with her 2 children and 3 roommates. The roommates were 33-year-old Clarence Butch Jackson, his girlfriend 27 Tia Lynn Johnson, and his cousin 17-year-old Justin Haddle. Christine's disappearance went unsolved for years. That was until February 2010. Clarence had been arrested for arson. While in prison, he came clean to Christine's mum. He told Christine's mum that he would tell her where her daughter was buried if, in exchange, they would swap him to a prison where he was closer to his family. Clarence, Tia, and Justin were subsequently charged for their part in Christine's murder. On the day that she died, Christine was at home with Clarence and Justin. Now, Christine was in a very awkward situation. She was actually in a love triangle with Clarence. As I mentioned, Clarence and Tia were dating, but Christine was also dating him. The relationship between them was physical, but Christine wanted to take it to the next level and be exclusive. Unfortunately for Christine, he turned her down. Desperate to try and get him to change his mind, she actually threatened that she would tell Tia about the pair of them if he didn't agree to be exclusive with her. Justin apparently overheard this conversation and said to Clarence, "You better finish her off." Justin then hit her over the head, crushing her skull. She'd been killed. When Tia came home that day, she actually noticed that Clarence and Justin were walking out of the woods. Little did Tia know they had just buried her roommate. They claimed Christine had just run away. It was only later that they eventually admitted what they'd done and asked Tia for her help. Shockingly, she agreed. They put Christine's body in Tia's car, where shockingly her 2 young children sat. They all drove to Snow Hill and dumped Christine's body by a B&B. Tia was sentenced to 15 years in prison, and Clarence and Justin both got life with
Leatherface Part 2. After escaping from an isolated farmhouse in 1973 and being picked up by a passing pickup truck, Sally Hardesty Enright alerted the authorities. She explained what had happened in the farmhouse, a place she simply referred to as Hell. After describing about how her friends and her brother had been hacked up for barbecue, she sank into a catatonic state. After a month-long manhunt, the Texas authorities were unable to locate the farmhouse. They found no killers, no victims, and no evidence to back up Sally's story. Officially, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre never happened. In the 13 years following those events, numerous other massacres occurred involving chainsaws throughout Texas. One such massacre occurred after 2 high school jocks called Rick and Buzz were driving around shooting at road signs, celebrating their football team's win. Whilst on the phone with a local radio station, the pair were chased down by a pickup truck. As it pulled alongside them, Bubba, or Leatherface, started attacking them with a 6-foot-long chainsaw. He then chopped the top of Buzz's head off with it. The next day, Lieutenant Enright, the uncle of both Sally and Franklin, arrived at the crime scene. He'd been looking into the disappearance of Franklin for 13 years, after Sally explained to him what had happened at the farmhouse. He was soon contacted by a radio DJ called Stretch, who gave him a copy of the phone call Buzz made which captured his murder on tape. Lefty then forced Stretch to play the audio tape on air, in the hope the public would finally start to take him seriously. After hearing the tape on the radio, Chop Top arrived at the station and confronted Stretch. Leatherface then burst out of a room and chased Stretch around the station. Stretch's co-worker LG then returned with coffee, but he was brutally beaten with a hammer by Chop Top. Leatherface left Stretch alive but lied to Chop Top, implying that he'd actually killed her. The pair grabbed LG's body and drove back to the abandoned Texas Battleground amusement park. This is where they were living. Stretch followed them and was chased by a car as she entered the grounds. It turned out to be Lefty, who'd been following them all along. Stretch then fell through a hole in the middle of the ground into a room surrounded by the remains of the victims of the Sawyer family. Lefty then grabbed a chainsaw from his car and entered the interior of the grounds. Stretch was confronted by Leatherface, but he didn't kill her. He instead placed LG's skinned face and hat on her before tying her up and walking away. LG then miraculously woke up and freed Stretch before dying. Drayton Sawyer then saw Stretch trying to escape and she was soon caught by Leatherface. Lefty then found a skeleton in a wheelchair and realised it was his nephew Franklin. Stretch was then held down as Grandpa Sawyer attempted to kill her with a hammer. A battle then took place between Lefty and the Sawyer family, which ended when a grenade held by Drayton went off prematurely. Chop Top and Stretch survived the blast. They then had a fight outside, which ended up with Stretch attacking Chop Top with a chainsaw. That caused Chop Top to fall off a tower and die. Stretch was the only one left alive wielding a chainsaw in victory.
What? Nothing there, mate. Nothing there. What? There's nothing there.
Part 2 of the Victoria Martins case. So police had entered the apartment and found Victoria's dead body. This is where it gets really complicated. So in Michelle's police interviews, she said that she was present at the time Victoria was killed, and so was Fabian. She said that she'd seen Fabian and Jessica abuse Victoria in front of her face, and then Fabian had killed her. She also said that she'd invited men round to the apartment previously to abuse Victoria. Due to Michelle's confession, Fabian Gonzalez was initially charged with murder. It took another 2 years for the truth to finally come out. Michelle and Fabian were not present when Victoria was killed, and there's absolutely no evidence to suggest that Michelle trafficked Victoria for sex. Michelle apparently has a very low IQ, and she doesn't think or act the way that most adults do. She's very impressionable and she likes to please people, so when things were suggested to her in her police interviews, she just nodded and agreed. It also came to light after further DNA testing that there was an unknown male with Jessica when Victoria died. His DNA was found on Victoria's back, and he is the one that murdered her. Jessica was questioned again, and she admitted that a man with a Mexican accent had knocked on the door asking for Fabian. When she told him that he wasn't there, he forced his way past her into the apartment, grabbed Victoria and killed her. He said that Victoria's death was revenge for a dispute he'd had with Fabian over drugs, and that Jessica then needed to get rid of the body. When Michelle and Fabian got home, Jessica had told Fabian what happened, and apparently they'd told Michelle that Victoria had just gone to bed. Once Michelle was asleep, they set about dismembering Victoria's body in the bathtub and burning her remains. Fabian had then gone to bed, but in the early hours of the morning, Jessica, high on methamphetamine, had come into their bedroom and attacked them both with an iron. They'd run outside, and this is when a neighbour called the police. After all this new evidence came to light, there was a lengthy trial, and eventually in 2022, Jessica Kelly was sentenced to 44 years for her part in Victoria's killing. She pleaded no contest to 6 felony crimes, including reckless child abuse resulting in the death of a child under 12. Fabian Gonzalez was sentenced to 37.5 years for his part in Victoria's death, although he could serve just half of that and be released for good behaviour. Victoria's mother, Michelle Martins, was sentenced to 12 years for her part in Victoria's death. The only person to be charged with murder in this case is the unknown male whose DNA was found on Victoria. He is now only known as John Doe, and he's still out there somewhere. Murdered on her 10th birthday, Victoria Martins was completely failed by everyone, and her killer is still out there. She was born on August 23, 2006 in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Growing up, she was a happy, lovely child, and she enjoyed gymnastics, swimming, and playing with her friends. Her mother, Michelle, worked really hard to provide a life for her daughter. She also had a son 2 years younger than Victoria, but he eventually went to live with his father. 2016 is where things took a turn for Michelle and Victoria. Michelle had got involved with a man called David Hernandez. One afternoon, CPS got a call from Michelle saying that David had tried to kiss her daughter and that she wanted to report him. David had a history of sexual abuse against children, including a few children in his own family. He'd also been arrested just 3 years earlier for trying to kidnap a 4-year-old girl. It's unclear whether Michelle knew about his history, but she soon broke it off and kicked him out of the apartment. CPS did refer the report to the police, but it was never investigated, and they said that trying to kiss a child is not a crime. There were several more calls over the coming months to CPS from Michelle. It's not clear what she reported, but they said that they did an internal review and there was no evidence that abuse or neglect had occurred. Just a month before Victoria's death, Michelle met a man online called Fabian Gonzalez. He had a long criminal history and was a drug user. Some of his previous charges included assault and child abuse. He soon moved in with Michelle and her daughter and would invite other drug users around while Michelle was at work and Victoria was at school. On August 15th, Fabian's cousin Jessica Kelly had just been released from prison, and he moved her into the apartment. She was also a drug user and also had a criminal history, including drugs charges and conspiracy to commit rape. It's pretty clear to see that Fabian and Jessica shouldn't have been allowed anywhere near Victoria. On August 23rd, 2016, Victoria had been at school celebrating her 10th birthday with her friends. She got dropped off by the school bus at 4:35 p.m. and made her way home. Around 6:30 p.m, Michelle and Fabian headed out to Paradise Hills to buy drugs, leaving Victoria alone with Jessica. It was at this time that Victoria was murdered. Later that evening, 911 received a call from Michelle's neighbour saying there'd been a disturbance. When police arrived, they found Michelle and Fabian both outside with deep cuts to their faces. They said that Jessica had attacked them both with an iron while they were sleeping, and when police tried to enter the apartment, Jessica locked the door and then jumped off a balcony, fracturing her ankle. Police were told that Victoria was still in the apartment, and when they forced their way inside, they immediately saw smoke coming out from under the bathroom door. They could never have prepared themselves for what they found in that bathroom. Victoria's body was in the bathtub. She'd been strangled, dismembered, wrapped in a blanket and set on fire. Some of her organs had also been removed. This is where the story gets a bit complicated, so please join me for part 2.
This is the disturbing case of the child who killed a child.
In July 2018, 6-year-old Alicia McPhail was abducted from her bed. She'd been staying with her grandparents in the Isle of Bute. She'd gone to sleep watching Peppa Pig, and no one had any idea of the horrors that would unfold that evening. Meanwhile, 16-year-old Aaron Campbell was drinking with friends at his house. Aaron apparently became upset in the night because he had been arguing with his mum. He had had a challenging upbringing involving physical and emotional abuse. Aaron decided that evening he wanted to get some substances to smoke from a couple that he knew. The couple in question were Alicia's dad, Robert, and his girlfriend. They'd been known to sell substances to Aaron previously, but he could not get hold of them. Intending to go and steal them off them, Aaron armed himself with a knife. He headed to Robert's house where he lived with his parents and girlfriend. This was obviously where Alicia was staying that evening. When he arrived at the house, he noticed the 6-year-old sleeping in her bed and took the opportunity to snatch the poor defenseless young child. Disgustingly, he carried her to a secluded location, SA'd her and then killed her. He then disposed of his clothes in the sea. At 6 a.m. the next day, Alicia's grandparents woke up to discover that the little girl was missing. They straight away alerted police and locals. When the family asked Aaron to keep an eye out for the little girl, he texted them back saying, "Oh damn, I'm sure she's not went too far." A local man soon discovered Alicia's lifeless body around 15 minutes away from her house. Along with a lot of the local community, Aaron's mum actually checked her CCTV of her house. She was hoping that this would help with the investigation, and it definitely did. She saw her son leaving and returning from the house that night, and she handed the evidence over to police. Aaron was arrested, and it was discovered that the clothes that he'd abandoned on the beach did actually match with his DNA.